You're watching JCT TV. This is Bible Study for the 21st century. Welcome, friends. Jim Cantelon here. We are in the book of Luke. We're still in chapter 5. And as you know, if you watch JCT, you know I take my time. I do not rush. This is the word of the Lord, and I prefer to absorb it slowly than quickly, even going back again and again to reposition or discuss anew something we've gone through before, because it's so alive and so vital. And we'll find that is the case today, as we get into the continuing narrative of Luke chapter 5. I've made it clear, I think, many times over not just the past few shows with Luke, but going right back with Matthew and Mark as well, that Capernaum really became the center of Jesus' northern ministry. And by northern, I mean the Galilee. Yes, he was born in Bethlehem, raised in Nazareth, spent most of his life in Nazareth, of course. But now as his ministry began, he had repositioned himself and was now basically boarding at Simon Peter's mother's house in Capernaum. Last time we read about his miraculous healing of this young man that his four friends dropped through the roof of the house or the synagogue. That happened in Capernaum. And I was just in Capernaum again. I've been there scores of times in the 7 years I lived in Jerusalem, but also many times since, doing a lot of TV shows and visiting it with various friends from churches that I've pastored. Capernaum is a beautiful, it's just a setting now. It's no longer a village, it's no longer a town. It was a fishing village in Jesus' time, very active, and very much, if you will, in the mainstream of business coming from Africa up, from Egypt, along the coastal highway in old Canaan, and on its way up, through Syria, and then around the Fertile Crescent into Mesopotamia, down into Babylon and Persia, up into Europe. But it was a major trade route. And Capernaum was a place where people could get water for their camels. They could, get some food for themselves. They could kind of rest for a while. And of course, Capernaum took full advantage of this with, taxes. If you want to come through our town, you want to enjoy our amenities, then you got to pay the price. And that's just the way it works, and it has worked through the millennia. Anyway, Capernaum is a very small area. And you can visit the ruins, if you will, the foundational ruins of Peter's house, which is just about, I would say, I just walked it the other day, maybe 40 steps from Peter's house to the shore of the Sea of Galilee. And then the synagogue is maybe 20 steps this way. And there is the ruins of a 4th century synagogue there. made out of white limestone. But the foundation stones are black basalt rock, which is what the synagogue in Jesus' time would have been built of. In fact, probably everything in Capernaum, like Bethsaida, would have been built out of black basalt rock. Mount Hermon, which is just a few miles north, at one time was a volcano spewing out all kinds of volcanic ash and lava, which became stone, which became, boulders eventually. I mean, time has its way of shaping these things. And that was the case in Capernaum. But it's a very picturesque place. It's right on the downslope, or the upslope, I should say, of what we call the Mount of Beatitudes. And it's not really a mountain, it's just a big hill. But when you're up there, where Jesus taught the Sermon on the Mount, you're really up quite high, and you look down on the Sea of Galilee. It's a beautiful, beautiful panoramic view. I used to love stopping at the Mount of Beatitudes on my way back from Lebanon every week after broadcasting the gospel from the Voice of Hope. And I used to just kind of breathe the air and enjoy the view, sometimes pull out my Bible and read the Sermon on the Mount again and again and again over the years. But it's a beautiful, beautiful setting. This was Capernaum. Okay. He healed this young paralytic in Capernaum, and the crowd is dispersing somewhat. And one of his soon-to-be disciples, Matthew as we know him, but his name was Levi at that time, invites Jesus to a banquet. Now let's read it in verses 27 to 32 of chapter 5. After this, referring to the healing of the paralytic, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector by the name of Levi sitting at his tax booth. "Follow me," Jesus said to him. And Levi got up, left everything, and followed him. Then Levi held a great banquet for Jesus at his house. A large crowd of tax collectors and others were eating with them. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, who belonged to their sect, complained to his disciples, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" Jesus answered them, "It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." They said to him, "John's disciples often fast and pray, and so the disciples of the Pharisees, but yours go on eating and drinking." Jesus answered, "Can you make the friends of the bridegroom fast while he's with them? But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them. In those days, they will fast." Now, the citizens of Israel and Judea hated tax collectors for a few compelling reasons. First, nobody likes to pay taxes, right? You like paying taxes? No, I don't either. Second, these tax collectors were fellow sons of Abraham, fellow Jews, who had been hired as subcontractors to highly placed Jewish businessmen who had won major contracts from the Roman occupiers to collect a certain quota of shekels every tax season for Rome. Third, they got a percentage of the money, plus whatever surcharges they could force their fellow citizens to pay. And fourth, they could force their fellow citizens to pay because they had authority. They had the authority to send reluctant people, even delinquent people, to prison. Okay? So little wonder they were persona non grata. Tax collectors were seen as scum, right down there with adulterers and drunkards and prostitutes. And the only ones who would associate with them were, in the words of the famous country song, friends in low places. So nobody liked these guys. Jesus, on the other hand, bore tax collectors no ill will. In fact, he called one of them Levi, as we just read, to follow him as a disciple. And then he attended this great feast put on by Levi in honor of the occasion. And Levi's friends in low places were with him. The scribes and the Pharisees spluttered and fumed at Jesus' indiscriminate behavior, but he responded to their pique by saying, "It's the sick who need a healer." And there's a double entendre here, because there are those who suffer affliction of the body, and there are those who suffer affliction of the soul. And the scribes and Pharisees were suffering afflictions of the soul. So basically he's saying, take stock, you guys. Look in the mirror. You're very ill indeed. Wow. So They then asked him the question, and I read part of it, why are your disciples not fasting? And Jesus answered, can you make the friends of the bridegroom fast when he's with them? The scribes and the Pharisees, they fasted twice a week. It was a core value in their piety. And apparently, John the Baptist and his disciples fasted as well, but Jesus' disciples didn't. So this lack of rectitude troubled Jesus' detractors. It provided them yet another opportunity to find fault. And find fault they did. And Jesus had a quick answer. Nobody fasts at a wedding. At the risk of impiety, one might infer that no one fasts in heaven either. He says, verse 34, can you make the friends of the bridegroom fast while he's with them? But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them. In those days they will fast. Okay, now he moves on to a parabolic teaching in verses 36 to 39. He told them this parable. No one tears a piece out of a new garment to patch an old one. Otherwise they will have torn the new garment, and the patch on the new will not match the old. And no one pours new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the new wine will burst the skins, the wine will run out, the wineskins will be ruined. No, new wine must be poured into new wineskins, and no one after drinking old wine wants the new, for they say the old is better. There's another double entendre there, which I'll get to. This eating and not eating, fasting and not fasting metaphor transitions to a drinking metaphor. Jesus refers to the common practice of storing new wine in new wineskins. New wine expands because it's fermenting, right? And new wine skins stretch to accommodate the fermentation. An old wineskin won't do that, so it just will simply burst because it lacks elasticity. The application is clear. The gospel is new wine. The oral law of the rabbis is the old wineskin. Little wonder the scribes and Pharisees couldn't handle Jesus' teaching. Indeed, as they saw it, the old is good. The old is, we want the old, okay? Because the new was stretching them, stretching their religious subculture to a bursting point. And within a few years, the religious leaders would burst into an explosion of fury and deliver the Son of Man to the Romans to be crucified. The scribes and Pharisees were on a track here. They still didn't know how they were going to do it, but they were determined. One day we're going to kill this guy. That's the only way we can get rid of him. He's a thorn in our side. He's a blasphemer. He's a son of the devil. He must be gotten rid of. Well, as we'll discover, you don't get rid of the Son of God. I'll be back after this. This is one of our special patients with Somebody Cares in Malawi. And she's in great need of care. And our ministry in Malawi, Somebody Cares, knows how to care for people. And so we have been visiting with her, we've been praying with her. And as you may notice down beside her, this is a regular part of home-based care. There's fortified porridge called lakuni fala. It's fortified with vitamins and minerals. There's soap, there's cooking oil, there's some selenium, trace mineral, which boosts the immune system and is so gratefully received here, and other products that just kind of help ease the burden a bit. But she would be an example of thousands that Somebody Cares has been caring for these past 22 years. And with WOW, we're just grateful that we can be a part of it. So friends, from time to time on the program, you see WOW promoted, Working for Orphans and Widows. This is a ministry, and it's an international charity that my wife Kathy and I created with the Lord's direction 25 years ago, almost 26 years ago now. It'll be 26 years ago at the end of the year, actually, end of 2025. We had no idea when we started what would become of it. We just had a sense from the Lord that the Lord was calling us to challenge the churches of sub-Saharan Africa to get in the program, if you will, of God's plan for caring for orphans and widows impacted by, at that time, the always fatal disease of HIV and AIDS. It was astonishing. A third of the population was being impacted by HIV and AIDS, and they were all dying because it was always fatal. And I saw the churches basically standing aside, many of them casting doubt and even judgment on those who were infected. There was all this stigma and discrimination, and the church was just ignoring its responsibility to care for the orphans and widows that were emerging in their thousands. And because we had established a bond with many churches in sub-Saharan Africa while I was pastoring in Jerusalem, that's a story in itself, I was able to kind of hit the ground running and started challenging pastors on a large scale to get their local churches, and there are churches everywhere in Africa, to get these local churches engaged in caring for orphans and widows in their communities. And it was a slow build, and it was like pulling teeth initially, but this ministry has grown and grown and grown, and you can log on to wowmission.com and just, take a look at our website if you like, or if you're into Instagram, at Wow Mission, I should say. We're also on Facebook, and you can follow us. Anyway, over the Christmas season, we did a third year in a row where we encouraged people to wrap up a bicycle. And the point of wrapping up a bicycle was to wrap up a bicycle for the hundreds of volunteers that we are now overseeing through local church engagement in various countries of sub-Saharan Africa. People who are, because of their concern and their love and their compassion, are ministering to orphans and widows who are in various stages of affliction and dying. And they have faithfully been going out now for 25 years, almost 26 years, with the love of the Lord, caring for people who can't care for themselves. And we have been able to, by God's grace, raise funds to provide food for these afflicted ones, and also to provide food for our volunteers, who in the main are widows themselves. There's some men involved, but mainly widows. And this huge ministry has been happening now. And again, log on to wowmission.com and you'll see little updates there. So anyway, the bicycle thing. Some of our volunteers will spend a whole day walking to and from one patient because they have no means of transportation. And it seemed to me that, especially for women walking by themselves out in the rural areas of Africa, was not a good thing. Better they should have a bicycle. A bicycle can, make an 8-hour trip into a 6.5-hour trip, make all the difference in the world. So a few years ago, I came up with this idea of making bicycles a Christmas gift to volunteers. And for the last few years, we've been buying and then distributing bicycles. And when we do this, I've seen them rejoicing, singing, ululating, drumming, dancing, some on their knees. And it's like giving them a car. And they use it not just for their own purposes, but often if they have a patient who needs to be transported to a little country clinic somewhere, they'll put that person on the carrier over the back wheel and we'll take them. Now, sometimes these people can't even, sit up. They're so weak. And so often what the volunteer will do is put them on there and put their arm around them and push the bike. Sometimes they strap the person to their own body and ride the bike with this person kind of hanging there. But you do what you got to do. But so much better than having to put someone into an ox cart. These ox carts with 2 oxen and this cart with no suspension bouncing, over the ruts. This poor person, it's a wonder they're not dead by the time they get to the clinic. Anyway, these bicycles make a really big difference. And I just pulled a few pics, which I thought you'd be interested in seeing, of some of the bicycles that we've been able to give out over the past few years. Here's one of our male volunteers who's very proudly standing beside his bicycle. And in the background, you see a couple of young village girls, and beyond them, you can see in the distance, I'm standing there with a woman. Her name is Teresa Malila. She heads up our ministry in Malawi. Here's another fellow with his bicycle, and in that red bag, he's got food supplies for the patient that he's about to visit. And those food supplies will last for 2 to 3 weeks. Then, of course, it's mainly women who are doing the volunteer work. And here's one woman with a male, I think it's her husband. And very rarely do these women have husbands. But they're also, you see the bag there with supplies on their way to visit someone who is in need. More bicycles with a chicken. There's lots of village chickens in Africa, and they get really well used. And I've encouraged them to keep these things, well maintained. It's not necessarily in the culture there to maintain things, but I have really come down on maintaining these vehicles, and they're doing it. You'll see that this volunteer supplies are in a backpack put on the carrier over the back wheel, where often one of the patients will sit. And these are just precious people. I mean, they're there caring for people who are lying under blankets, can hardly open their eyes. They can't move. And here's the case in point. Take a look at this quick video. We have a young woman here who is suffering from the complications of HIV and AIDS, and also she's very seriously diabetic. She's just 21 years of age, and didn't have the strength to open her eyes when we were there. And we were able to pray for her. Her name was Maria. And the volunteers were there praying with her. And then some of the villagers come and gather around. And, you don't have to convince any of these villagers that God exists or that he loves them. They know it and they believe it. And it's quite an inspiring thing to be with them. So, whether they're singing or standing around or praying or just, watching as these village women are doing, it's an event. It's really a huge event, and it's an opportunity for us to reach out, with the hands and feet of Jesus. And by the way, just for your sake, because I get asked this a lot, Kathy, you keep mentioning Kathy. Who's Kathy? Well, here's Kathy here. She's my best friend and has been married to me and I to her for 55 years. Can you believe it? I know. People see her with me, they figure she's my oldest daughter. But, it's a very fulfilling thing, friends. And we're very aware of the fact, as we do this, that we're not only representing the Lord, but we're representing you. I'm not a high-pressure fundraiser, as you know, by any stretch. One of the criticisms I get from some fundraisers who watch the show is, why don't you push, your ministry more often? Well, it's just, I prefer to just be low-key. That's the way I am. I also believe firmly that the Lord knows our need before we even ask or think, and he owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. Money is no issue to him, and he speaks to his children to care for the sick and the dying, and his children respond. And, WOW is by no means the only thing out there happening. My goodness, there's so many great ministries all over the world. We're just one very small player in a very big, menu, if you will, of various Christian ministries out there, but we're doing our part. And, as the old adage says, it's better to light a candle than curse the darkness. The darkness in our case is the impact of HIV and AIDS and opportunistic afflictions, including COVID, that have followed. And even though you don't hear much about it anymore in the news, HIV and AIDS is still a huge issue in Africa. There's over 1 million people a year being impacted and afflicted by HIV and AIDS. It just continues. And even though modern medical, therapies are really making a big difference, the thing is not dealt with. And because we're dealing with the poorest of the poor, who have no money for anything, they're often, as the Bible, as Jesus in the Bible would call them, the least of these. They're not even at the first rung of the ladder. They're not even at the bottom of the ladder. They can't even see the ladder. They're so far away from conventional, social assistance. So By God's grace, we're calling the churches to be the church again, to care for the orphan and widow, to look after the least of these, and to do it in Jesus' name, believing that the Lord will supply their need according to his riches and glory. That's what we do. So if you want to support WOW, you just log on to wowmission.com, or you just get the coordinates from our show here, and you just follow the links, and you'll be able to support the ministry to whatever extent you want to support it. And when you support WOW, you support JCT, because JCT is the official voice of WOW. So we're one and the same. We're part of the same ministry, the same person, and by God's grace, we're trying to do a job, and we're glad you're a part of it.
WOW! Working for Orphans and Widows has been caring for orphans and widows in Africa and India for over 20 years. Key to its vision is partnership with local champions who engage hundreds of church-based volunteers in home-based care. Care for the sick and the dying in their own humble homes. They are defenseless and afflicted. They are the least of these that Jesus would have us love and care for. Our partnered champions are based in South Africa, Zambia, Malawi, and India. They provide faithful, accountable, and godly care for thousands. Together with WOW, they truly are the hands and feet of Jesus to the sick and the dying. Founder and president Jim Cantelon has been committed to both teaching the gospel via Jim Cantelon Today TV and practicing the gospel through WOW. WOW is a proven ministry. We are grateful for your support. Call, write, or log on to wowmission.com and be inspired.
And just a word further to our work with Working for Orphans and Widows. We are facing a constantly expanding horizon in this ministry. It doesn't have a kind of a fence around it. It's not limited in any sense. Because when you're dealing with the poor and the poorest of the poor, well, we all know, as Jesus himself said, the poor are always with us. And when you know that at least a third, if not 40% of the world live on less than $2 a day, you realize that the horizon is unlimited. And by God's grace, we'll just keep pursuing it, until the Lord says, enough already, and shuts it down or brings someone else in to take our place. But the point is that it's a calling. And when you've heard a call from the Lord, you know this, friends, it's pretty hard to resist. And to the extent you resist, you're not happy. Thank you for your support. We'll see you again next time. Bye for now.